Hey, Lee Robinson here from American Sentinel Canine. So it's been a while since I've made a video, and you're gonna hear some dogs barking in this video as I walk the property. We have been working on a lot of things. Instead of making YouTube videos, cleaning up, we had a bunch of stumps back here. Been using that stump grinder. I've had to cut 170 trees down last year, and this year we're dealing with the stumps. So I ground up about 100 stumps last year, and about 70 stumps last year and about 100 stumps this year. And so we finally got rid of all the stumps, and we've been working on our property instead of worried about making YouTube videos. So I'm going to show you a few things that we've worked on, but the main thing that I'm going to do in this video is address what I'm going to call the fake dog men, the fake trainers. And it may step on a few toes, but you, my viewers, my supporters, in my opinion, deserve some truth. And instead of being worried about making videos and staying on top of YouTube algorithms and making our YouTube channels relevant, real dog men, real trainers, real breeders, they have lives and they got to focus on their priorities. The people who are focused on producing a video 3 times a week, these guys are not real dogmen, okay? If you're watching YouTube videos, and which is fine, there's nothing wrong with that for entertainment, but let's keep it in perspective here. If those people don't have dogs, or they don't train dogs, and they don't breed dogs, then they probably don't have proof of concept. And what a person that's really doing this is not going to be focused on the presentation of an image or YouTube algorithms. They're going to be focused on doing what needs to be done in order to maintain the top position or the best that they can be. So, and the reason why I say or the best that they can be is because really what we're doing is not competing. The best dogmen are not trying to compete necessarily against others all the time. Sometimes they may be doing so, but what they really need to be competing against is who they were yesterday. And you know, YouTube algorithms and YouTubers that are interested in producing 3 videos a week or whatever it may be, generally speaking, are not focused on being the best that they can be. And so, yes, we've been focusing on the property. You can see all the wood chips out here. This is going to be smoothed out. I've got to smooth this out. It's got a bunch of ruts and dirt and crap like that. This is all going to be smoothed out and addressed. We've done a lot of things to the property lately because I've been focusing on improving my life. See, when I moved here 25 years ago, this was a very rural area. And so I was able to do shooting. We have a backstop right there. I was able to run our dogs with ATVs and whatnot, you know, off leash. Can't do that anymore. It's far too developed out here to have our dogs running around off leash. And when I say off leash, it's not that they were roaming freely, okay? We would have them off leash when we were working with the dog and the dog was going to stay with us. But now there's just too much around here for us to do that. We've got to keep our dogs on leash, and the only time that they're off leash is if I'm doing basically obedience or bite work here on this property with the fence out there. But I can't take them off the property anymore. We used to be able to ride. There was 2,700 acres across the street. Now it still looks like there's 2,700 acres out there, but it's not. Now there's people that live out there now, okay? Driveways every so often. So we can't really do the dogs running loose anymore. Can't really do as much shooting as we used to. We can still legally do it, but as a person who likes to practice good citizenship, I don't want to disturb my neighbors. So I've got to evaluate how much am I going to stay on top of my shooting skills and whatnot if I stay here. Will I need to join a larger range? And look, that's not the tactical range that I would like for it to be. And being realistic, I would love to have an 80-foot berm, you know, that's 8+ feet high with steel targets and whatnot for us to shoot on a regular basis. What we do now is we prop up a a few items and we shoot out there on that. Let's see if I can't zoom in on this direction. Let's see if I can flip it. I don't think I can flip it once I'm recording. But anyway, we put up some targets, you know, and we work around the trees or maybe some obstacles that we put out there, and we practice our shooting a little bit. But I can't do it like I used to. I do still train the dogs here, of course, but consciously I've talked about having an indoor training facility because I don't like to disturb my neighbors. And when we train here, it gets loud, right? So that's just something to keep in mind. I don't know if I'll stay here. I thought about, you know, we got a quote about an informal quote about building an indoor training facility, and it was going to cost us about 150 grand, and I was down for it. Then we got a formal quote. It came in at 270 grand, 268. So I'm like, how are you off almost 100%? The original quote was 150, so that's almost double. So we're postponing the plan on the building of the facility. Another thing we focused on, if you saw the videos of our pond lately, this was completely covered in weeds. It really got out of hand. That was a battle to clean up, but we got it cleaned up. Another thing we'll show you here in a minute that we've been working on. So yeah, there's people out there producing YouTube videos 3 times a week, and they have other guys on their channel that have done this for 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 years, trying to give advice on breeding, but they have no consistency in their program yet, because even if they are gonna be consistent at some time, it takes 10, 20, 30 years to prove that. And you can't prove that if you've only had 1 generation of offspring or 2 generations of offspring, and you're only showing a very small number of animals that you produced. So, you know, all that takes time to produce. And when I look for a coach, I believe in going to people that can prove what they say instead of just having rhetoric. It's true that if something is logical and can be explained, that the pedigree of the individual may not matter. But how are you going to know if it's logical or makes sense if they've never done it? So you need to see people that have done it. So the pedigree kind of does matter for a proof of concept. This is another thing we did. This area of our property always stayed wet. So we brought in loads of dirt and put in a culvert here. And so we can have 4 acres back here. See, I've got a total of 9 acres. I got 5 over there and 4 over here. And the main access point to the 4 acres was always marshy. So driving our tractor or lawnmower over here to maintain this property was kind of a mess. But we did that. We brought that in, got a culvert in there, and the culvert that we got was aluminum, which is not good. The culvert should be made out of steel or heavy-duty plastic. But we got an aluminum culvert, and that was something that I was concerned would crush. The reason why I bought it is because we found it used, and it was 1/10 of the cost of what a regular culvert is. A regular culvert that's 40 feet would have cost me about 800 bucks. I got that for 80 bucks. So it was about 1/10. But what I did is I had some 3 or 4 inch angle iron that was about almost a 1/4 inch thick. And we laid 2 strips of the angle iron that's 20 foot long on top of the drive portion of this culvert. And I reinforced those pieces of angle iron with concrete. So we actually have a little concrete under that dirt with that angle iron embedded in that concrete. So we have a place that we can drive over to bridge across and protect the culvert so it doesn't get crushed. So that was something else. So we ground up the stumps, we got rid of the weeds in the pond, we put this culvert in, and we've just been working on improving the property. Right now, my plan is to still stay here, but if I will or not is debatable, because I do want to live a certain lifestyle. I don't want to be a hermit, you know, out in no man's land where I can't interact with people. But I do, when I'm home, I like to be able to shoot. I like to be able to train. I like to be able to ride ATVs, exercise the dogs, those type of things, without disturbing my neighbors or society. And while we can legally still do that here, how much longer will I be able to do that for here? Because this area is growing, and it's growing rapidly. When I bought this land, it was worth almost just 25 to 30% of what it's worth now because of the community development. This section of you can see there's dirt here. This area, and the grass is growing very quickly to fill it back in, was low, and it always pooled water, and we scraped off the hill and filled in a low spot. So now we're just improving the property and getting it better so that can be addressed. I don't have any dogs on chains right now. We've downsized a little bit. We're down to, let me think, basically 29 dogs. We can house 20. We got actually less than that. We're less than 29 dogs because we've got 29. We got 27 kennels, and they all have dogs in them, but some of them are puppies that will be sold. And then we have 2 dogs in the house. So that's 29 occupied points, but some of those occupied points are puppies. So we have probably about 25 dogs, basically. And, we used to always have over 30. So we're downsizing a little bit. No dogs on the chains. I've got to get the tiller out here. We've got a lot of low spots, like here you can see. There hasn't been a dog out here, so this is neglected. But there's not a dog here, so it doesn't matter. We got holes in the ground like this that we're gonna till up and smooth out. And the point of all this is, man, don't live on YouTube. Yes, YouTube is entertainment. You can see some stumps that we've ground here. These were big stumps. That was all from one stump. This stump was just a big stump, grounded up. So while YouTube can be entertainment, we should not let our lives pass us by staying on YouTube or talking about concepts in a false castle that we've built up based off of illusions. There are some people in the sport community that mock and harass protection trainers because the protection trainers oftentimes don't have skill set. And then there are some people that are protection trainers that mock sport trainers because sport trainers oftentimes have the wrong tactical approach. So the truth is, hold on to what is good and discard what's not. Be exposed to a lot of different things. And if something is true and valid, keep it, use it. But if something is not true and not valid, discard it, get rid of it. And the problem with a lot of these YouTubers is they are sharing information as if it's true, as if it's valid, but they've never, ever stepped out of their built-up castle, their false illusion and image that they've tried to portray themselves as an expert. We've done protection training. We started off with protection training from 2000. Well, look, I've been studying this stuff, no offense intended, and I'm not trying to be braggart. I've been studying this stuff since 1990. And I didn't start breeding and actively training protection dogs until 2000. But I studied breeding and I studied training from 1990 to 2000, and then I really began the breeding program that we have. And some people don't understand the purpose of why a gladiator breed should be used. We'll address that. I'm hoping it doesn't get too noisy as I walk behind these kennels, because these dogs are going to know that I'm here and they're going to say, "Hey, Daddy, come play with us." So apologize for the noise. I may have to pause the video as I walk past here if it gets noisy. Gladiator breeds are important to me in a protection dog because, we'll pause here. Gladiator breeds are important in a protection dog because training can only take a dog to its potential, but it's not going to make a dog into something that it's not. If I was going to try to teach a potential MMA fighter to be world champion, do I want to spend 5 years giving an individual a skill set if they're going to cry when they get punched in the face? I recently just shared a video that I saw where a man picked up his child on the steps and started to walk down the steps, and he got bit on the ankle by a raccoon. When that happened, the man threw his child into the yard. This is a baby. Could have killed the kid. As far as I know, the kid's okay, but it could have killed the kid. And he threw the child and screamed and jumped around because he panicked under stress. This is not somebody, no matter their skill set, you cannot teach that individual to be comfortable in combat because under stress they panic. This is something that is genetic and early nurturing. All right, by early nurturing, you can make a stronger individual. And if you don't imprint properly, then if you babysit and protect and always pick up your child every time there's a potential threat and never let them be exposed to some stress, when they grow up and become a man and they are in stress, they're going to throw their child and scream and holler because mom's not there to protect him anymore. And this is what happens when we call men that are men toxic. All right, men are supposed to have some strength. I'll tell you, my biggest weakness now that we're working cleaning up the property is my fitness, my health, and my organization. These are the things that I need to address. All right, my training. I need to do more training. When I first started training, we did protection work, and people in the sport community said, well, protection work trainers suck. And you know what? They're right. To a degree, they're right. But I stepped out of my comfort zone and got exposed to sport trainers and picked up some of the tactics and methods that they use. And to me, there's a difference between a trainer and a technician, and we'll address that. I picked up some of the techniques that they used to add tools to my toolbox. And in doing so, I advanced my knowledge. However, the root base of what we originally did reigns supreme over sport work. And I hate to say that because it sounds like I'm giving an endorsement to protection trainers that don't have the knowledge that I may have had, or I did have, trying to be humble and say may have had, but the truth is I did have when I got started. There's a lot of protection trainers that didn't do 10 years of study before they started. I did 10 years of professional study before I got started. And so therefore, when I got started, I already had a lot of foundational knowledge to build from. Personally, I think sport trainers get hung up too much on drive assessment. And, you know, are you working in prey drive? Are you working in defense drive? Are you doing, what quadrant of operant conditioning are you working in? Are you working in positive reinforcement or negative reinforcement? Are you working in positive punishment or negative punishment? And while all these things technically do matter in terms of advancing our skill set, it's overcomplicating the basics. And what we need to do is master the basics. You reward what you want and you punish what you don't want. Whether it's positive reinforcement or negative reinforcement is less important than just reinforcement, okay? Sometimes you want to use positive reinforcement to maximize the outcome. Sometimes you want to use negative reinforcement to maximize the outcome. And don't confuse negative reinforcement with punishment, because it's not. Reinforcement always increases a behavior. Punishment always decreases a behavior. So positive punishment is when I give you something in exchange for undesired behavior. So let's say my child disobeys me and I spank them. I'm giving them a spanking for disobeying me. So I'm punishing them with positive punishment, meaning positive means give. I give them a punishment in exchange for undesired behavior to decrease the undesired behavior. All right. Negative punishment is when I remove something to punish them. So let's say the kid stays on their phone too long and they stay up late at night. Well, what I'm going to do now is take the phone completely away from them and maybe not let them have it the next day. So I'm taking away, which means negative, to remove something from the situation in exchange for displaying undesired behavior in order to reduce the undesired behavior. That's negative punishment. However, whether I do a takeaway or, sorry, the mosquitoes in my ear. Whether I do a takeaway for punishment, negative punishment, or whether I give a punishment like a spanking for punishment in exchange for the undesired behavior of disobeying me, Both of those, understanding those, may help me become a better trainer. However, it doesn't change the basic concept that most people tend to understand, and that is you punish what you don't want. While it is important to optimize training, it's not as important as it is to just get the general point. And the general point is to take your training in such a way that you increase what's desired and you decrease what is undesired. All right, this is the main goal of a trainer. And I understood this very well when I first got started. And this is basically taking an ethological approach. It's a basic psychology concept of, it's not optimizing the training in terms of whether you're using positive or negative, but it is basically optimizing the training in a more broad perspective. So we're going to back up and focus on the general concept of punishing what we don't like and rewarding what we do like. And so if you're going to compete at a sport level and compete competitively, because I said compete, not participate. Participating in sports, in my opinion, is a good thing, because even for the protection trainer, because by participating, you're going to get exposed to methods and approaches that you may not have, tools that you may not have in your toolbox. Competing in them, however, may not be a good thing, because now you may be giving up some of the tactics of protection in order to optimize your performance for competition, but thereby reducing your effectiveness in protection work. People say, well, good dogs can do both. Good dogs can do both. But when you develop a skill set for a particular task, there's a give and trade. There's a trade-off. You may be making the dog calmer on the grip. You may be making the dog more comfortable in the bite. But when you make the dog more comfortable in the bite, are you, if you're doing it through training and not through genetics, are you maintaining the concept of this is combat? Because combat is not a comfortable situation. So in my opinion, the best way to improve comfortable in combat is not through the training. Yes, it's important to have some of that in training, and I'm not saying it's not, so don't get it twisted here. It's still important to make sure you're optimizing a dog's comfortable in combat if you can still maintain the intensity. And this is why gladiator breeds are important, because gladiator breeds have a genetic predisposition to be comfortable in combat, where other breeds that are more pain sensitive are not comfortable in combat. I actually think that there is a genetic predisposition in some of my dogs to, while they are sensitive to me for correction, it's a mental sensitivity to me as the alpha, if you want to call it that. If you think it's stupid to call a human an alpha, because there are people that believe that humans cannot be alpha to dogs because they are different species. Look, save that topic for another day. You understand what I'm talking about. The dogs see me as the boss. If I am their alpha, the dominance and their sensitivity to me is out of respect. It's not out of pain sensitivity. I have seen these dogs. Some of you will be offended by this, but I know of some of these dogs that have been hog hunting that have gotten gutted and they never released their grip. Their pain sensitivity to actual pain in combat is not a factor. They're not sensitive to pain. They stay engaged. And now you, as the owner, have to responsibly manage that dog in that situation in order to protect its well-being, because the dog is not gonna. That, to me, is the ideal protector, because the ideal protector shouldn't panic when a raccoon bites on the ankle and then throw their baby out into the yard. How are you going to say that you can protect your family if you're going to scream and holler and throw your baby out with the bathwater when you enter a stressful situation? It makes no sense. All right, so being comfortable in combat begins with the mind. All right, the body. I used to like the 100+ pound dogs, okay? I like the 110, 120, 130 pound dogs. I didn't really want them bigger than that because I know that they become unpackable. You can't really take them with you when they're bigger than that in a vehicle and stuff like that on a regular basis. But I like the little bit smaller dogs, but they're still big enough to be durable. So in my opinion, the ideal dog is going to be anywhere from realistically 60 to 95 pounds, okay? Ideally, I would say 70 to 90 pounds, but I'm going to broaden the spectrum to 60 to 95. And it depends a little bit on the phenotype. The more blocky animals, the more stocky the animal, the more durable, the more powerful, but also, again, more heat sensitive. And this is a general rule. It's not always true. But the Mastiff type dogs, when you get, I'll pause the video here. Okay, the Mastiff type dogs, unless you're a hermit that lives in true isolation and you don't go anywhere and you don't do anything with your dog and you're only wanting your dog to protect you only on your property, the Mastiff type dogs are no good. I mean, they're good for only your home. But even if you go camping and you're like, well, I want my dog to protect my campsite, are you not going to go for a hike? All right, if you go for a hike, that Mastiff type dog, if there's any kind of humidity or high temperature at all, when I say high temperature, I'm talking about over 80 degrees, which is not hot. Look, we are in Mississippi. These dogs are out here in 95, 100 degree weather, and they're fine. All right. When you have a Mastiff type dog and it goes for a hike in 80+ degree weather, and let's say you're gone for a 5K, all right, 5 kilometers, which is only 3 miles. You come back to your camp, your Mastiff dog is done. Okay, it's going to be wanting to hide in the shade or look for a creek bed and lay down and cool off. And it's going to want to stay there for probably 30 minutes. That dog is not going to provide much protection if, when you get back to your camp, there's somebody raiding your camp. And you're like, well, I don't want to engage somebody raiding my camp. Legally, that might be the right choice. But emotionally, you know that you could be potentially giving up tens of thousands of dollars if somebody raids your camp, if they're in your vehicle or whatever. All right, so you have to make that decision yourself. I'm not going to tell you what to do in that situation because that's a legal assessment. But from a protection aspect, have you ever heard that it's better to have it and not need it than it is to need it and not have it? To me, a smaller dog has it. So the 60 to 95 pound dog still has the ability. Still has it, the ability to engage. So if I don't want to use it, I can say no. But if you have a Mastiff type dog, 130 pound dog, 150 pound dog, and you're getting back to your camp, your dog doesn't have it anymore. It's done. So while it may work in a home setting, it's not going to work in a realistic setting for all the time. There's some more stumps that we ground up. So, you know, be careful about taking advice from people that have all these theoretical opinions, but their top priority is YouTube algorithms instead of taking care of their property and improving themselves. Because really, true success begins not on a YouTube algorithm. True success begins with being better today than you were yesterday. And so while I do respect my initial approach of focusing on protection work, I also respect my ability to step out the castle that I built and stepping into the sport world. Even though I didn't compete in sports except for once, I still got myself exposed to their theories, their philosophies, their techniques, and understood what they did. And I've added some tools to my toolbox. I don't agree with their tactical approach all the time, because to me, while there's some truth to some of the things that they do, we have to weigh the cost versus gain ratio. So if I'm going to give up a priority, such as this is a conflict, the dog should know that a protective situation is not a game. The opponent is an opponent, not a partner, okay? So an attacker is an opposition. We want to stop the attacker. We don't want to play by the rules with an attacker, Okay, we want to end and stop the threat. And so this is one of the things that I liked about some of the techniques and approaches that we used early in our training. We did what I would call real protection work. And for years, I slowly began to deviate from that and focus more on some of the technical aspects of some of the attributes that the sport community brings to the table. And in doing so, perhaps I increased my skill set in my toolbox and became better at certain things, but at what cost? And so we continued to do rather well, I would say, in the protection proof of concept until about 2018. In 2018, what happened was life hit us, and it hit us hard. And I hurt my back. After I hurt my back, we had some family issues also with my mother. We had to deal with some legal issues there, as we had some estate management that we needed to deal with. And my mom's still alive. She's 92 years old though, and she's struggling. And so I had to intervene to a degree to deal with that. My wife had cancer. I had gallbladder surgery. And life just hit us pretty hard, and the training kind of got put on the back burner for a while. We still evaluated the genetic potential of our dogs before we did breeding. We still did health testing before we did breeding, but the dogs weren't necessarily being trained like they once were. And so now, since things are coming together and we've got our priorities in order and we're getting things organized, we're going to be getting back to some of our roots on protection training. And as I've worked with some decoys, I can see that a lot of decoys today, and I call them decoys instead of agitators, don't really have a true grasp of what protection training is, because they still have the mindset of a sport and points. So they look at, does the dog stay out of the pocket? All right. If the dog is avoiding the pocket, which means direct in combat zone, then they think that the dog has a self-preservation mindset. And because of that, they think the dog is less confident. Every experienced hog dog needs to avoid the pocket. If you go hunting on a hog and you stay in the pocket a couple of times, you're going to get injured. And if you don't adjust your approach, you're going to be killed. The pocket is the most dangerous zone. The safest place in combat is to take the back of the opponent. And this is why an effective hog dog grabs the ear or the muzzle or and stays out of the pocket. They keep their bodies, the dog's body should be parallel almost with the hog, so they're not in front of the tusks. Because if that hog gets underneath the dog and roots that hog's belly, it's going to spill his guts or cut his jugular. And yes, you can use cut vests, but cut vests are not always protective. They provide a layer of protection, but not 100% security, not a guarantee. So these dogs that stay in the pocket, they have a limited career in hog hunting. And so therefore, we should understand the same thing is true in MMA. In MMA, if you watch professional fighters, they try to take the back of their opponent. They don't want to stand in front of their opponent with their hands down by the side to prove that they can take a punch. Should they be able to take a punch? Yes. Should they stay in the punch zone? No. Okay, that's stupid. All right, but yet protection trainers are mocked by the sport trainers when their dogs pull and go to their opponent's back. All right, by that I mean circle to the outside. Sport trainers will say that's showing the dog's weakness. Is it showing the dog's weakness? Maybe. There's some truth to that sometimes, but it could also be showing the dog's experience. So is it a genetic weakness? If the dog evades the combat zone, it may be a genetic weakness to evade the combat zone. Or it could also be the dog has learned, because it's had enough combat, that even though they're committed to engaging, why sustain injury? All right, so circling and staying out of the punch zone, the cut zone, the danger zone is important for self-preservation. And if we want our hog dogs to know that, we should probably want our protection dogs to know that. Trying to explain this to a sport person creates conflict, because They're just gonna argue that the dog is insecure. And while there's truth to that in an inexperienced dog, there's not truth to that with an experienced dog, because an experienced dog is only going to get experienced if it avoids injury. Now, on that note, are dogs expendable? Yes, they are. And somebody might say, how dare you not protect your dog's life? Look, I didn't say I wouldn't protect my dog's life. I'm just saying when it comes to making a choice between my child and my dog, I'm going to protect my child. If it becomes a choice between my wife or my dog, I'm going to protect my wife. So while the dog is not something that I'm going to just let get injured, at the same time, I'm always going to choose my wife or my child over my dog. All right. And by that, let's say somebody breaks into the house, comes through a window in my daughter's room. I might go in there and help the dog engage the attacker. Or I might grab my daughter, get her out of the room, and then go back in and then engage the attacker. Okay. So it depends on the situation. We have to adapt to the situation. Sport trainers don't like to adapt to the situation in real time. They want to pre-train the routine that is going to be presented in their event. And there are events where people will try to gather information about what the routine will be in a particular event and then train for that specific routine. There are times when people who know the judges, and they will ask the judges to not present certain distractors that they know that their dog's not good with. For example, let's say that the dog will not bite anything metal, and they have to do a retrieve, a certain retrieve, and they'll say, hey, don't put keys in there because my dog will not pick up metal. And so they'll set, what's supposed to be random, and they'll put things in the retrieve item task, but there will be nothing metal because the judges may know the trainers or vice versa. And so there are situations where people cheat on various things, and that's not called adapting. Now, I don't need my dogs to retrieve specific items, but the sport community will mock the protection community. The problem that I have with the protection community is because they're almost like isolated pockets, and I'm guilty of this to a degree. I'm an isolated pocket that lives in an area that lacks good decoys to train with on a regular basis. And as a result of that, they oftentimes lack experience. And this is where we need to be proactive to go out and step out of our little castle that we built, an illusion for ourselves, where we think that we can dictate everything that's the way it should be. And we create this illusion of reigning supreme. Like I said, I'm trying to be better today than I was yesterday. However, and so myself is my own assessment point. However, I should be willing to see methods used by those who disagree with me. And by that, I should have people on my channel or in my circle that disagree with me, that challenge my view set. However, there is an additional requirement. They don't need to be combative types that are trying to become famous. Okay, if there's a reason why there's certain people I will not have on my channel. And that's because they're trying to win an argument instead of actually pursue the truth. People need to be willing to pursue the truth. And some people aren't willing to do that. They just want to mock and harass instead of actually pursue the truth. And I think my viewers deserve exposure to the truth, not a YouTube algorithm or a popularity contest or an argument. And so there are people that I will not bring on my channel because they're just flat out unethical people that will disrespect, remain unprofessional, and try to belittle others constantly instead of actually obtain growth and knowledge and truth. If I was trying to learn how to drive a car most effectively, I would probably seek out race car drivers. If I was trying to learn how to do MMA, I would probably seek out somebody that was very competent in MMA. If I wanted to learn protection, I would probably talk with people who have been in combative situations, or at least understand and have trained for combative situations and proven their skill set in those type of situations. I would not ever seek protection training advice from somebody who deals with hula hoops and ribbons and bottled water pits, you know, these like swimming pools that are filled, these plastic fenced in areas or tubbed in areas that are filled with plastic bottles, because in a protective situation, you're never going to encounter that. So why would they do that in a sport? Well, we need to understand why they do that in a sport. And this is something that we should be willing to accept. And that is, they do this to test the dog's nerves. So in my opinion, we should incorporate nerve testing into protective situations so we don't throw the kid out when we get bit by a raccoon. The man had the skill to hold on to the baby, but they panicked. So, and that was because their nerves failed. And so from that sport community, we can learn the purpose of that bottle pit. It's to see if the dog will panic in a strange situation. And so we can do that with things that are going to be applicable or accessible in a protective situation. Instead of using a bottle pit, get a trash can lid, get a chair, a lawn chair, get a picnic table, and whatever's in your environment. If somebody was to attack us, a gas can, somebody might say, well, who cares if the dog can get hit with a plastic gas can? If a plastic gas can is something that everybody owns a plastic gas can. So hitting the dog with a plastic gas can, in my opinion, is applicable, because a perpetrator might grab what is accessible, a lawn chair, a plastic gas can, or a trash can lid, and might try to fight your dog off with those items. What they're not going to use is a plastic bottle pit, all right, a big fenced in area with full of plastic bottles, or PVC that's glued together in a certain way with plastic bottles hanging from it. Something a person might use is a garden hose. So use a garden hose, spray a garden hose when your dog's in combat, and see if the dog will remain engaged, or does it run and hide in the back of the property. These are things that we need to incorporate into protection training. Protection training shouldn't be prey drive. Protection training shouldn't be defense drive. Protection training shouldn't be a single tactic in your methodology. Protection training should be the willingness to remain in combat when the combat gets stressful. A fight, okay? It is always and should always be a fight. And this is why I believe if you want to raise a protection dog, while you need prey drive, while you need defense drive, while you need nerves, confidence, really what it comes down to is the dog comfortable in combat. And this is why the game-bred American Pit Bull Terrier excels. There's no breed on the planet that is more proven to be comfortable in combat than is the game-bred American Pit Bull Terrier. You might say, well, look, Malinois have excelled in sports and dominated the field. You're right, they have, but sports are not combat. There are pit bulls that have been shot by police officers on video when they were engaged in a bite, maybe a justified bite, maybe an unjustified bite. But there are pit bulls that have been shot in combat or gutted on a hog in combat, and they remained in combat until their life left their body. Why? Because they have a genetic predisposition to being comfortable in combat. Now, obviously, we don't want unstable animals, so a breeder should look for the commitment in combat, but also look for stability. And this is why, I have zero respect for people that want to say, well, the pit bulls bite more people than any other breed, and therefore they should not be used in a home setting. If you cannot understand that a family protection dog is not a single component, but it's multiple components, one of those components being stability. If you can't understand that you need comfortable in combat, but you also need stability, if you think every pit bull is unstable, you're an idiot. You're ignorant. You should be smart enough and educated enough and experienced enough to know there are dogs out there that are comfortable in combat that are also stable with the family, that are not so reactive that just because, let's say you had a cup of coffee and your kid spilled the coffee on them and they holler and scream because it's hot and it burned them. There are dogs out there that will not react to that, all right? They'll say, this is a family member. I'm not supposed to react to somebody just because they jumped up and hollered. There's other people that don't understand this. They just breed for drive, and they don't look for stability. And then when their kid gets hot coffee on them, they jump up and holler, and the dog reacts to that and bites the kid. All right, this is poor breeding. We need a dog that is reactive enough to engage a threat, but not so reactive that they lose stability in their mindset and can't differentiate between an opponent and a family member. All right, so this is an important aspect. And unfortunately, there's a lot of sport trainers that think reactive dogs are bad. Look, every dog is reactive. This is what stimulation is. Stimulation is a stimulus, and what you're doing is you're going to evaluate the response to that stimulus. A response is a reaction. There's an action and a reaction. So every dog is reactive. The question is, is the dog unstable? The question is the dog unstable when it's reactive? We don't want instability. We want a dog that's clear enough in mind that when it reacts to the raccoon biting its leg, it doesn't throw the kid in the yard, all right? So this is where knowing a family member is important. These type of things will never be understood by people that don't train, that don't step out of their comfort zone, that don't breed, but are just trying to produce YouTube videos 3 times a week. Entertainment is fine. Entertainment is welcome. We're free to do what we want in the United States to a degree. And, you know, there are, of course, restrictions, YouTube, shadow bans, people that talk about certain things, and they like to suppress certain opinions and views that are outside of their comfort zone or agenda. But for the most part, we still have a high degree of freedom here in the United States. And so I understand if a person wants to produce YouTube videos and try to disrespect somebody, I understand that. However, take it with a grain of salt. Do they have proof of concept? Can they do or explain what you cannot do or explain? Or are they just talking out of theory and opinions from an illusion from a mindset that they have convinced themselves to hold true, but doesn't hold true in the real world? And so this is why experience matters. I have not made a YouTube video in a while. We have been focused on grinding these 100 stumps that we had to grind, dealing with the low spot in the property that we had to fix, dealing with that wet area that I had to put the culvert in, cleaning out the pond, raising some puppies, doing some breedings, and just generally speaking, cleaning up the shooting range, getting our life back in order instead of trying to maintain our algorithms on YouTube. However, I highly advise my audience, if they seek good information, seek professionals that can do or explain and prove in concept what it is that you're seeking to learn. Now, if you want to watch other stuff for entertainment, then remain subscribed to the YouTube channels that are just putting out content that's entertainment, but take it with a grain of salt. If they can't provide proof of concept, these are probably not the people that you need to be taking advice from, because they don't know what they're talking about, okay? There's so many people that want to talk about pedigrees or breeding and genetics that don't have any understanding of pedigrees. For example, let's take prepotency in a dog. Some people think that the dog that's tightly bred is prepotent. Maybe. It certainly improves the consistency of that dog's ability to produce a certain trait, but that doesn't mean it's prepotent, because if that dog is tightly bred on recessive traits and then it's bred to a dominant dog, even if that dominant dog is scatterbred, that dominant dog is going to be more prepotent than that tightly bred recessive dog. Okay, but people don't understand this type of stuff. What does prepotency mean? Prepotency means the ability to produce a certain type consistently and do so when bred to a multitude of other individuals. All right, so prepotency is a combination of tightly bred and dominance. And so this is where a line breeding program is important, because if there are any dominant traits that you want to eliminate from your breeding program, then you have to not only eliminate it in your yard, you have to eliminate it within the breed as a whole, or any dog that you're going to breed to, because if you breed to a dominant undesired trait, that dog is going to dominate and produce that type in the offspring that you don't want. And so this is where understanding genetics comes into play. Also, a person's eye, what you can see, is most important in success. You have to be willing to see the truth. What this means is you see what's in front of you. I see things that some people don't see. There are people that have been here that may not like a certain dog that I like, but guess what? They don't have the success that I have when it comes to breeding. They might see something that does or does not work, and I might see something that does or does not work, but we have two different opinions on what's going on. Maybe I saw some things that they didn't see. will make allowances for things that I don't like, but I will not make excuses for things I don't like. For what I mean by that is the difference between allowance and excuse is allowance will allow things that you don't like if the dog still has the ability. Excuses are when you allow things you don't like, but the dog does not have the ability. So I will not make excuses for dogs that don't perform. However, I will assess the performance as a whole picture and not just a tunnel vision of a small circle. So what I mean by that is if I have a dog that displays comfort in combat on hog, but has been taught to never display aggression to a human being, then I will allow that dog to be bred because it is proven to be comfortable in combat on a hog. And I know that all it needs is to be taught that it is allowed to display the same level of aggression to a human being. But that dog has been taught not to for years. And so the idea of changing that dog to allow it to be aggressive to a human is not probably in the cards unless you're going to spend a lot of work on that. And I don't worry about that. If the dog has displayed comfort in combat, I know that if I get an offspring off of that dog that has the same comfort in combat, but I imprint it between 6 weeks and 16 weeks, that I can also take that dog and transition that comfortable in combat mindset to whatever it is that I want it to be comfortable in combat with, whether it be an animal or a human or whatever. I can teach that dog that by imprinting it. And a lot of your sport trainers don't want to have combat with young dogs. I think it's fine to have combat with young dogs, putting the dog in a real combat with a man, as long as the man understands that they're dealing with a young dog. Keep the level of combat age appropriate. If Mike Tyson was in his prime, 21 years old or whatever it was, punched Bruce Lee when he was only 12 years old, Bruce Lee would have never developed into the man that he could have been. But if you took Mike Tyson at 12 and Bruce Lee at 12 and let them fight age appropriate, then they both could still maintain their potential as long as somebody was managing it and didn't let it go too far. So we want, like my dog Bam Bam. Some people say, well, don't let Bam Bam have real combat. Somebody made a comment on, you flanked a puppy? Yes, we did. Guess what? The puppy displayed no concerns about the flanking because we kept the flanking age appropriate. We didn't really try to hurt the dog. We just wanted the dog to know that human beings can be an adversary. And then by keeping it age appropriate, we let the level of stress and dominance by the man not be overwhelming to subdue the dog's drive. All we wanted to do was make sure that the dog's mindset was, this is combat, not bite work. And so we will be going back to our roots on combat training instead of sport training. But we're going to do it while maintaining some of the attributes that I've learned from the sport community in order to maximize our ability to grow and succeed even in a different venue like protection work. I'm going to keep those tools in my toolbox, but I'm not going to let it change my mindset. And so I've been exposed to the different mindsets, and I think it's good for a dog to pull. It doesn't have to push. Pushing is fine if the dog wants to push. Pulling is fine if the dog wants to pull. Shaking is fine if the dog wants to shake. Rebiting to get a deeper grip is fine. In fact, it's desired. Rebiting for the purpose of countering is not fine. If the dog already has a full mouth grip, there's no reason to re-grip as a counter. If the dog is all the way to the tonsils, I don't need to see the dog adjust its bite. And a lot of sport trainers want to see the dog continually adjust its bite, adjust its bite, adjust its bite. Well, then the dog's getting mouthy. That's not a good thing because now we're teaching the dog to potentially let go in order to re-grip. If the dog has a vital bite and its grip is full and it's in a good position, there's no reason to let go. The counter should then be applying pressure to the bite or shaking on the bite. So this is where techniques need to be understood secondary to the tactic, the objective. The objective should be to win the fight. This is a very long video. I could keep going on for hours and hours about this, but I wanted to explain why I have not made many videos lately. I have basically 6 more weeks with my son here to help me out in cleaning up the property before he goes out to college again, maybe 8 weeks, whatever it is when he goes out to college. So this summer, we're focusing on getting this property back in order. I'm gonna start focusing on getting my health back in order, my agility back in order, because my biggest weakness right now in terms of tactic is gonna be the fatness that I have. You know, I'm not like super cow or anything like that, but I am the type of person that will get winded if I had to run a couple hundred yards. Can I run a couple miles? Absolutely, I can run a couple miles. But when I'm done running a couple miles, I'm gonna be out of breath, and I'm not gonna be able to perform like I should be able to perform as a provider and protector of my family. So this is the next weak link that we're gonna get. We're getting our property back in order. We're going to get our health back in order. I'm gonna evaluate whether I should stay on this property or go back to a more rural area where I can live the life that I want to live. And you can probably hear the rain. It is coming down over here. So I'm gonna head inside, and y'all have a blessed day. Take care.